Very nice to be here, and thanks particularly to Katrina for kind of squeezing me in at the end when she sent round a circular saying that, does anyone want to contribute? I said I'd actually like to say something about the so-called monster meeting, the large demonstration, which I thought might complement nicely these indoor meetings. That's real focus of the project, and I've called it Chartist Visibility. Well, I came up with that title late last night, but I thought it rather works neatly because it's the large demonstration, it seems to me, that really puts politics on the map. It's all very well having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these meetings where all the organisation goes on, but in terms of affecting the public, it's often when you come out on the streets and occupy public space in your thousands and thousands and thousands that then, the press and the media and public opinion will really wake up and take notice of you. So that's one meaning, and then the other meaning is, because I work a lot now with images, and it was fascinating to see Matt's images as well. Of course, they're always fascinating. Crowd scenes are always, it seems to me, fascinating in all kinds of ways. I'm interested in visual representations of such events. And one of the ironies, in a way, that you'll see as I go through, fairly quickly, of course, through some of the images, is that it's often the other side, so to speak, who produce a lot of these images. Because radical movements, pretty much, I'd say right up to the late 19th century, didn't employ artists, or didn't employ visual imagery very much at all. So we tend to get it from the other side, particularly from caricature. And this little vignette here I'll come back to, because I'm offering this meeting a kind of discovery, I hope, yes, right at the end. It seems to me the monster meeting, so the very large meeting, is still to the present day about these kinds of things. It's an expression of literally of the size and commitment to the movement. I've used this quote from Joe Barlow, who was an American radical in the Romantic period. It adds the force of numbers to the force of reason. And playing the numbers game is very important, it seems to me, in demos, in all kinds of ways I'll come back to. It's a sort of nation in waiting, particularly at this time, yes. These are the people who don't have the vote, or generally who don't have the vote. It's got to be orderly, or at least if it is orderly, and radicals, of course, always said the meeting was going to be orderly. The violence is all imputed, it's a stereotype. It shows that we're not the mob, we're not the mob of that stereotype, that negative stereotype. Of course, it boosts morale. I was going to say, actually, in this room, if you haven't been to a political meeting, you may well have been on a demo, So we've all experienced some of this. It boosts morale, fosters collective identity, and it expresses that right to free speech and freedom to gather, which were constantly under attack by governments during this period. And to support petitioning, the petition itself is important, but so is the crowd that takes it to Parliament. They go together. In terms of the sort of prehistory, if you like, of Chartism, both in terms of these kinds of gatherings and the visual imagery that's associated with it, there are these two poles, So there's the orderly procession in its hundreds and thousands, yes. Here's the Protestant Association from 1780 taking their petition to Parliament, yes. You know what this is going to turn into, of course, in a moment, But there's a petition, because there's going to be an even bigger petition coming up with it in Chartism, of course. It does rather remind you either of it's a sort of semi-military kind of thing, when you see massed ranks of people walking all day along the streets, or something almost religious about carrying this huge document, to Parliament. It's almost like a kind of catafalque or ark, well, of course, the opposite. The opposite extreme is then what it becomes in the Gordon riots, yes. This is back to Matt's notion, the kind of unruly crowd, So this polarisation between the two, yes. This is always the worst fear of the state, is that, of course, this is what these meetings will become. So the purpose of a lot of satire or caricature is to sort of demonise, to marginalise, to deflate, isn't it? To undermine. Yes, to stereotype these, even the possibility of these events being successful, it seems to me. And that's part of what, right to the present day, the right-wing media are very good at doing, yes. So they play the numbers game often. So that was the Gordon Riot, 1780. Then we get the London Corresponding Society period, as Matt says. Here's Gilray's famous kind of caricature of John Thelwall addressing Copenhagen House. It's a very well-known image. I haven't time to go into an analysis of it, but you can see that it's trying to kind of delegitimise what's happening by kind of ridiculing everyone involved, basically. And this comes at the point at which the government's about to clamp down, the so-called two acts, and make meetings very restricted, limited to no more than 50 people. Yeah, so the possibility of a monster meeting disappears at that point. You can't have more than 50 people meeting or you get into trouble. Yeah. But of course, so the whole idea is either to, if not abolish completely, but to severely limit. However, of course, the radical movement does spring up again after the Napoleonic Wars. So you then get these large-scale meetings happening again. Smithfield is a venue from sort of 1817, 1819. Here's Charles Williams. Of course, you know, you can see what the message is here. It's the swinish multitude in a sense, yes. It's one idiot talking to other idiots, basically, yes. Or it's the emphasis on vulgarity and incomprehension. What interests me often about caricatures of radicalism is that it's peculiarly ambivalent, because at the same time as it's saying these things are ridiculous, they're also menacing. It can be menacing and ridiculous at the same time. Yes, so it's peculiarly contradictory. Cruikshank has a go at women. Katrina mentioned, you know, women involved in Chartism. Cruikshank had a go at women reformers in this caricature of 1819. Again, I won't go into it, but you can see it's more about flirting and sort of, yeah, rumbustious display than it is about rational politics. But of course, where this is heading at this time in the prehistory of Chartism is all towards Peterloo, yes, and the Peterloo massacre, as it was known, called Peterloo, if you don't know, as an ironic echo of Waterloo, yes, some years earlier. So it's the most unpatriotic act to send the yeomanry cavalry in to break up the meeting, try and arrest Henry Hunt, the orator, and of course, as we know, there was panic, a lot of confusion, quite a lot of people were killed. So this is a great symbol, Peterloo, for all subsequent meetings of what might happen. Of course, radicals said this was an unprovoked attack. Yes, this was an unprovoked attack. So you turned it into a riot, not us, yes, by attacking us. Chartist visibility then, just to repeat what some of the things Katrina was saying, yeah, the open-air meetings start almost immediately. The really sublime ones are these torchlight ones that take place out in the countryside, and the government's rattled about those, yes, so it bans them basically, yes, says you can't have those anymore, but you can have them still in cities and in sort of less threatening moments. Fergus O'Connor saying, exaggerating undoubtedly, but this was quite common, yeah, he thinks that at 3 such recent monster meetings have been 1 million people present, so whether he knew he was exaggerating is hard to know. Who were determined to carry out universal suffrage morally if they could, but physically if they could not do without it. So that's always the sting in the tail, yeah? Kind of unstable element here. What happens to these large meetings if they are roused? You know, and the way they're roused, maybe by one of the speakers, one of the agitators, just going that bit too far in what they're saying. And then the idea is this kind of current of electricity passes through the crowd. There's been a lot of work done on this by critics. There's a book just come out called The Romantic Crowd by Mary Fairclough that makes the analogy of electricity like a sort of current passing through the crowd. And this fear of the crowd getting out of control affected a lot of polite radicals. Even William Godwin, you know, turned against Thelwall famously because he said, you know, you're too much of an agitator, yes. Really, that reform should be about rational debate in small polite groups with no place for these large meetings. They're too dangerous. So the monster meetings tend to peak along with the moments when the petition is being presented, those 3 waves of 1839, 42 and 1848. So in 39, the first petition's rejected. There are these riots in Birmingham. This is what to come back to at the end, yeah? Riots in the Bullring in Birmingham in July 39, really the first explosion of Chartist violence, if that's what you can call it, yeah? A pitched battle with police sent up from London, just as in the miners' strike, yes? Police were sent from London to police communities they had nothing to do with. The Metropolitan Police were sent up to Birmingham, partly, I guess, because they were the only real police force around in any sense, yeah? But they were sent up to London, and there was immediately this big clash with the child. I'll come back to that at the end, and the Newport insurrection, which we've heard about. 1842, next big wave. Second petition rejected. Widespread disturbance in the north of England, the famous so-called plug riots. Basically, Manchester's taken over for about a week. Yeah, it comes under what we might call workers' control. Many mills and factories brought to a standstill. And what I've added at the bottom is just the point that by now we do have the illustrated press, both satirical and, if you like, straight. So up to that point, there was no kind of official way to actually present pictorial reportage of these events. So the 1842 events fall into the plate of the Illustrated London News. It's their first big political event to cover. Then the next wave, 1848, because of the French Revolution, Chartism gets revived, and we have this important meeting in Trafalgar Square, another place, of course, highly symbolic to the present day. Think of the poll tax riots, so-called riots here, which saw off the poll tax in 1991, was it? George Reynolds, who's this maverick Chartist, who was already a best-selling novelist, and I've done lots of work on Reynolds, so I wanted to tell you something briefly about him, comes to power at this meeting in Trafalgar Square, and I've got some nice images to show you of that. Then the famous 10th of April meeting on Kennington Common, which there's a whole chapter of Alton Locke by Charles Kingsley, for example, just called the 10th of April. It's often seen as the last fling here of Chartism, partly because, not as many demonstrators were there as the Chartists hoped. In fact, fewer demonstrators than the number of special constables who were sworn in, not used necessarily, but sworn in. And Gamage, first historian of Chartism, says London became a military fortress. So they were taking no chances. There's not going to be a French Revolution here. So on to the images. The Chartist Petition of 1842 had an astonishing 3.3 million signatures, which Malcolm Chase says is actually a quarter of the whole adult population in Britain at the time. Absolutely astonishing. So that's what's contained in that large kind of coffin-like, being transported down Whitehall to Parliament. This is one of the few positive images because it was a kind of souvenir engraving. We don't really know much about the origin of this. I mean, I'm still kind of doing research on this, and there is actually surrounding the border surrounding this has all these kind of touristy shots of all famous buildings in London's West End, and you don't know if that's because that's where they went. I don't think so. I think it's actually a kind of, souvenir you might put on your, mantelpiece. But nevertheless, it's an orderly procession. They're off towards the Parliament in more senses than one. That's a direction of travel. That's out for the direction of reform. Of course, the old building had burnt down, so they were going to just part of what was left of the Houses of Parliament. The new one's not gone up yet. And then the other side, as I said, the flip side is always the violence and the kind of insurrectionary potential. So in the summer, the Illustrated London News covers all the events up north, the so-called riots. So this isn't a particularly threatening image because it's from some distance away, yes. But that is a much more threatening image. And it seems to me, this is a street fighting more reminiscent of the French Revolution of 1830. And if we had more time, I could ask for a straw poll of hands. See, well, which side is this image on? Is it neutral because it's right in the middle, and there's violence on both sides? It's not really an equal fight because it never is, because the troops have always got rifles against your sticks, basically. But we could talk more about that. 1848, again, a sort of straight-ish image, visual reportage from the ILN. Marching down, I think off Blackfriars Bridge, marching down towards Kennington. It's kind of peaceful, but there are all these special constables with their truncheons, you'll notice, at the front. So there's tension there, yes. I mean, it's policed, it's heavily policed, and you can see the platform in the background with the speakers on heading down. And then the famous photograph, which is the first political photograph we know of. Interesting, it's in the Royal Collection at Windsor now, William Kilburn's photograph, but the image itself had circulation because it was engraved, yes, by the ILN. You can see that it's a straight copy, more or less, yes. And I think, again, how do we read this? Well, you could argue, as some have, that the point about this are the gaps. So yet again, it's playing the numbers game and sort of showing you that the place wasn't full, And other Chartist historians I know say, actually, if you look at the photo, they're still streaming in the background, yeah? So, and in fact, there's another one that didn't get engraved. There's two, and the other one shows more clearly that it's sort of still filling up. But nevertheless, playing the numbers game is important. And it still goes on to the present day. Demonstrators said 200,000, police said 20,000. We're all familiar with that. But in terms of the satirists, rather than the kind of ILN reportage, they had a field day as well, especially with this meeting that Reynolds spoke at, where he came to power in March 1848. This is Reynolds up in the top. Can you see where he's speaking from? Near where the National Gallery is now. Oh, I don't know if there's this light. Oh, there we are. That's Reynolds up there, look, yes. Sort of haranguing the crowd, yeah. But it's typical of a kind of liberal satire, this, because both sides have been mocked, yeah. The police charging the populace, which consists of 2 frightened children, yes. So all these special constables are completely overreacting, while it also mocks radical discourse here, yeah. Here you are, revolutionary walnuts, yeah. Well, it's Cockney, isn't it? Walnuts, yeah. So it's typical of a lot of, what's happened there? Yeah, from current slide, of liberal satire that it mocks both sides. Reynolds, though, the interesting thing about Reynolds is because he was a very popular novelist, and he had thousands and thousands of readers already with the Mysteries of London. They were very worried about him because he wondered if he could convert these readers into Chartists. And he's trying to do that very obviously by inserting into Mysteries of London an account of that meeting, yeah. And if you look at, you can't read it, but this text here, yeah, it says, the aristocracy and the men in power treat the people's assemblies with ridicule and, God, I can hardly read it myself, yeah, and something the working classes when assembled as a mob. So he's refuting that stereotype of the mob. The point is, look at the disjunction between the illustration, which is obviously illustrating the story so far, you know, kind of romantic intrigue, and the text, which interrupts the story, yes, to give you an account of Chartism and why we need Chartism. And I mean, I've written a lot about this. So what they did with Kennington Common, the Satirist, was of course literally poured rain on the parade, yes. And here's a typical kind of deflation of the event. Reynolds, to me, here looks rather bored, but I'm still working on this, yes. And we think this is Harney, who's kind of ranting away, and of course everyone's leaving because of the rain, and all you're left with are the asses, yeah, as usual. So, and a kind of reporter figure here, interestingly, yeah, might be a concession to the ILN there, but again, I haven't time to read this in any detail. So, that's some of the work I've done on the monster meeting, yeah. But just go back to 1839, because although we've got a few images of the Newport, so-called Newport Uprising in Wales, where they're sort of attacking a hotel, are there any images of the July 1839 bullring riots? As I say, these are very important because most Chartist historians argue that this first wave, 1839, was the most revolutionary period of Chartism, yeah. The Northern Star had a circulation of about 40,000, which was bigger than any paper, including the Times, yeah, at this time. So it would, you know, and of course, for each copy of the Northern Star, there are many more readers. So, you know, it had this huge national circulation. The Chartist Convention had been meeting in London, then it moved to Birmingham, partly to get away from the government, you know, central government. And it was while it was in Birmingham, they were giving talks in the what's now the Bullring. It's called the Bullring then as well. And so the government sends up the Met, yeah, and there's this pitched battle on July the 4th, interesting date, as the 4th of July, there's this pitched battle. Eventually they have to send in the troops to sort it out. Well, so this event had always intrigued me because I thought, well, we don't have an image of it. Anyway, so just to give you the gravity of it, here's a report in the Northern Star of it, yes. Never has it been my lot to hear of such a base, bloody and brutal attack be made upon the people, save Peterloo, there it is, you see, as that made upon the men of Birmingham by the bloodthirsty bludgeon men belonging to the Metropolitan Police Force. Talk of despotism, there it was exhibited in its most hideous form. Talk of peace, there its guardians assumed the form of anarchists. Talk of law, there every principle acknowledged by the British courts abandoned. And the Russell Bravos, that's Lord John Russell, yeah, Home Secretary, let loose upon their prey. Talk of order, it vanished before the mighty power of the bludgeon and the sword. So it's very strong stuff. And in fact, a placard was issued with similar language that led to a load of arrests, yeah, subsequently, particularly William Lovett, you know, the famous Chartist, got arrested for that. So this is what I found, yes, and I hope you like it, yeah. So I'm proudly unveiling, yes, for the first time, yes, what I think is the only image, yes, that we have of the Bullring riots, and I found it in the Library of Congress. And what's also interesting is it's Dickie Doyle, Richard Doyle, you know, who went on to work for Punch and for Dickens, illustrated the Chimes, for example. Yeah, his father, John Doyle, HB, is a famous caricaturist in his own right, yeah, produced this series called Political Sketches. He's very young at this point, he's no more than 15, Doyle, yeah. Now, the interesting question would be, did he go there? I mean, there's no biographical evidence I can find. Did he do it simply from the newspaper reports, which he refers to here? Yeah, see the morning papers, he says here. Yeah, see the morning papers. This church does identify it. I think it's St Martin's Church it's called. Yeah, still there, isn't it? Still there. Now, I guess he could have just got that from somewhere else. There's no other particular architectural features, are there? But I think it's a fantastic image, you know, of police brutality, because it's, you know, these gigantic kind of, you know, Brobdingnagian figures, yeah, you know, from sort of Swiftian figures laying into the crowd, knocking them all like skittles, yeah. The crowd are generally, you know, they're not ridiculed so much, they are victims, but there are these two figures running away with, I think, what's a police truncheon, yes. I think that's what it is. And then when you look at the writing, you see, you know, this actually says, the strength of the people, hurrah, you know, the strength of the people, hurrah, as they're being picked up, you know, in clusters. So it clearly does ridicule radical discourse as well, because you see what I mean, it's sort of both sides in a sense here. But I think as an image of police brutality, because what it says, brutal police force, yeah, from London in the Bullring, Birmingham, you know, see the morning papers. So I think that this is a valuable document, you know. I hope you'd agree, you know, it's historically, but also, you know, artistically, it's a valuable document. I mean, you might say it's a pity we don't have any non-satirical images, and I agree, but the Chartist press didn't really value, it seems to me, visual representation, and the reasons for that we could talk about. It may be a lingering Puritan suspicion of the visual, yeah? It may be because they just couldn't afford it. I doubt it somehow, because they invested in portraits of Chartist leaders, yeah, they were given away as freebies with the Northern Star. There's a whole gallery of Chartist portraits, both cheaper versions, wood engraved versions, and the more expensive or the more lavish steel engraved versions. Yeah, they're pretty boring, to be honest, but I think that's actually the point of them, because they're trying to make Chartist politicians look like mainstream politicians, you know, fit for office. You know, Jeremy Corbyn has to wear a tie, you know, and start to look the part and sing the national anthem, or he's never going to get elected. And that pressure's on these guys as well. So anyway, I'm going to end there. I just offer you Dickie Doyle's Bullring Riots caricature for this project. Yeah, thanks.